The story of Gideon. He defeated the army of Midianite with only 300 soldiers. Bible stories in ancient times in Israel when judges governed the nation, the people lived in cycles of obedience to God, disobedience, oppression by enemies, and cries. For deliverance, it was a turbulent period, marked by instability and trials. The book of Judges tells us, Judges 6:1 says, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites, the Midianite. Oppression was cruel. They invaded the lands of Israel like a plague of locusts, destroying crops and taking livestock. God's people, once prosperous, now hid in caves and mountains, fearing for their lives and sustenance in the midst of this chaos. We find Gideon, an apparently ordinary young man, but destined for an extraordinary mission. Judges 6:11 presents the scene. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Imagine the scene. Gideon crouched in a place meant for producing wine, desperately trying to save some wheat for his family to survive. Fear and uncertainty hung in the air like a dense fog. It was in this moment of apparent weakness that the improbable happened. Judges 6:12 stat. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior, mighty warrior." Gideon must have looked around thinking the angel was talking to someone else. His response reveals his disbelief and frustration. Judges 613 tells us, pardon me, my lord?" Gideon replied, "But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." Gideon's response echoes the feelings of many of us when facing adversity. Where is God in the midst of suffering? Why do bad things happen if he's with us? But the angel did not come to debate theology. He came with a mission. Judges 6:14 continues, "The Lord turned to him and said, 'Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?'" Gideon, still in disbelief, tries to excuse himself. He sees himself as the least in his family, which in turn is the least in his tribe. How could he be the chosen one for such a grand task? Judges 6:15-16 shows us, "Pardon me, Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." God's promise is clear and powerful. It doesn't depend on Gideon's strength, but on the presence and power of God himself. Still hesitant, Gideon asks for a sign. He prepares an offering, meat from a goat and unleavened bread. The angel of the Lord then performs something extraordinary. Judges 6:21 tells us, "With the tip of the star that was in his hand, the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared." At that moment, the reality of the divine presence hit Gideon with full force. The text tells us in Judges 6:22-23, when Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die." The improbable calling was sealed. Gideon, the least of the least, had been chosen by God for a mission that would change the course of Israel's history. His journey of transformation from a fearful man hiding in a winepress to a fearless leader of a nation was just beginning. Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it "The Lord is Peace." That place in Ara, which had once been a symbol of fear and scarcity, became a memorial of the transformative encounter between a powerful God and an ordinary man. The call of God to Gideon was clear, but the young warrior still struggled with his insecurities. Although he had raised an altar to the Lord, naming it, "The Lord is Peace," Gideon needed more assurances before leading Israel against the Midianites. The narrative continues in Judges 636:37, where we read, Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor if there is dew only on the fleece, and all the ground is dry. Then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand." As you said, this request from Gideon reveals his persistent hesitation. He sought a tangible sign, something he could see, and a touch to confirm God's will. It reflects human nature, which often seeks concrete evidence, even in the face of divine promises. What happened next was extraordinary. Judges 638 tells us, and that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next morning. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Imagine the scene: Gideon waking up before sunrise, his heart racing as he approached the fleece. When he picked it up, he felt the weight of the water. His hands trembled as he squeezed the fleece, filling an entire bowl with dew. The ground around it was completely dry, an undeniable miracle. But the story doesn't end there. Gideon, still not entirely convinced, makes an even bolder request. Judges 6:39-40 states, "Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry, all the ground was covered with dew. This second test completely reverses the first. Now Gideon asks for the fleece to be dry, while the ground around it is soaked with dew. It is a request that defies the laws of nature, since the fleece would normally absorb moisture from the air. The fact that God granted this second request demonstrates his patience and understanding of Gideon's doubts. It serves as a powerful reminder that God often accommodates our weaknesses, providing the assurance we need to fulfill his will. These events hold profound significance. The fleece, a product of sheep, could symbolize the people of Israel, the flock of God. In the first test, the fleece being wet while the ground remained dry could represent how God would bless his people in a barren world. In the second test, the fleece being dry while the ground was wet could symbolize how God would use Israel to bless the nations around them. More than that, these fleece tests illustrate Gideon's gradual transformation from a man hiding threshing wheat in a winepress. He was now in direct conversation with God, negotiating the terms of his faith and leadership. It is important to note that although God answered Gideon's requests seeking signs is not the ideal standard of faith. In many other passages of Scripture, we are encouraged to trust in God's word without demanding miraculous proof. However, at this crucial moment in Israel's history, God, in his grace, chose to strengthen Gideon's faith through these tangible signs. The fleece test marks a turning point in Gideon's narrative. His doubts were dissipated, his faith strengthened. He was now ready to lead the people of Israel against their oppressors. The man who once considered himself the least in his family was about to become one of the greatest judges of Israel. The story of the fleece teaches us several important lessons. First, that God is patient with our doubts and is willing to provide us with the assurance we need to fulfill his will. Second, that faith often grows gradually through concrete experiences with God. And third, that when God calls us to a task, he also equips us with the confidence needed to accomplish it. As the dew dried under the rising sun, Gideon rose as a new man. His insecurities had been washed away, along with the dew, and in their place grew fierce determination. The warrior that God had seen from the beginning was finally emerging, with divine confirmation secured. Gideon was ready for the next step in his journey. The army needed to be gathered, and a decisive battle was on the horizon. The man who tested God with a fleece was about to be tested in the heat of conflict with renewed confidence from the signs of the fleece. Gideon was ready to lead Israel against the Midianites. God's call echoed in his ears, and the time to act had come. The narrative transports us to a crucial moment in Israel's history where human logic would be challenged by divine wisdom. Judges 7. One sets the scene. Jobal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him, rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near Mount Mor. Gideon, now also known as Jobal, let Baal contend with him after destroying the altar of Baal, had gathered a considerable army. The biblical text gives us an idea of the magnitude of this force. In Judges 7:3, now announce to the people that anyone who is afraid and trembling may return home and leave Mount Gilead. This statement suggests that the army was positioned on Mount Gilead, preparing for battle. The people's response to this announcement was surprising. The same verse continues 22. 0 men left and 10,000 remained. Imagine the scene: more than two-thirds of Gideon's army abandoning the camp, leaving behind only 1/3 of the original warriors. For a military leader, seeing 22,000 soldiers depart on the eve of a crucial battle would be devastating. But God had different plans. Instead of lamenting the loss of so many warriors, the Lord surprises Gideon with a shocking declaration. Judges 7:4 reports, "But the Lord said to Gideon, 'There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will separate them for you. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go.'" This divine instruction challenges all military logic. The Midianites and their allies were a formidable force. Judges 112 describes the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley. They were numerous as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Faced with such a vast enemy, the common strategy would be to gather as many warriors as possible. But God had other plans. Obediently, Gideon takes the remaining 10 men to the water. What happens next is a divine selection based on an unusual criterion. Judging is 7:57 tells us. So Gideon took the men down to the water, and the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink." 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest knelt down to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." This peculiar test drastically reduced Gideon's army from 32 to 300, a reduction of more than 99%. To put this in perspective, imagine a modern army of 100,000 soldiers being reduced to just 937. Human logic would scream that this is madness, a military defeat. But God's ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. This drastic reduction had a clear purpose expressed in Judges 7:2. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her." God was teaching a powerful lesson not only to Gideon, but to the entire people of Israel and to all future generations. Victory would not come through the strength of numbers or military skill, but through the power of God. This truth would echo through the centuries, finding its fullest expression in the New Testament, where the Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 1:29, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." The selection of the 300 warriors, based on how they drank water, may seem arbitrary at first glance, but it may have a deeper meaning. Those who lapped the water like dogs, remaining alert and vigilant, could represent the most prepared and attentive warriors. They did not lower their guard even for a basic need like drinking water. This quality would be crucial in the battle to come. Moreover, the number 100 has significance in biblical history. It was with 318 men that Abraham rescued Lot in Genesis 14. It was also with 300 men that Samson defeated the Philistines in Judges 15. God was once again demonstrating that he can accomplish great deeds with small numbers. Imagine the mixed feelings in the Israelite camp that night. 700 warriors returning to their homes, perhaps relieved to escape battle, but also ashamed for not being chosen. And the 300 who remained, they must have felt a mix of honor at being selected and fear at the seemingly impossible task ahead. As for Gideon, this was the ultimate test of his newly strengthened faith. He had asked God for signs with the fleece, and God had answered now. God was asking Gideon for a sign of his trust, leading a tiny army against a formidable force. The reduction of Gideon's army teaches us profound lessons about faith, trust, and the power of God. It reminds us that God does not need large numbers or abundant resources to accomplish his purposes. He often chooses to work through the small, the weak, and the improbable, to demonstrate his power and receive all the glory. This story also challenges us to trust in God, even when circumstances seem impossible. How many times do we feel inadequate or ill-equipped for the tasks God places before us? Gideon's story reminds us that it is precisely in those moments that God can operate most powerfully, as the 300 chosen warriors prepared for battle, sharpening their swords and adjusting their armor. An atmosphere of expectation hung over the camp. They knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. The God who had reduced their army certainly had a plan for victory. Night fell over the Israelite camp. In the distance, the campfires of the vast Midianite army flickered in the valley, reminding Gideon and his men of the seemingly impossible task before them. But with God, the impossible was about to become possible. Israel's greatest battle was about to begin, not with the roar of thousands, but with the quiet faith of 300, with only 300 men. Against an army vast as clouds of locusts, Gideon faced an apparently impossible situation. But God, in his infinite wisdom, had an extraordinary plan to ensure Israel's victory. The night before the battle was crucial. God, recognizing Gideon's natural apprehension, offered him unique opportunity to strengthen his faith. Judges 79:11 states, "That night the Lord said to Gideon, 'Get up and go down to the camp, for I am giving it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying afterward. You will be encouraged to attack the camp.'" This divine instruction reveals both God's understanding of human weaknesses and his willingness to strengthen his servants. Obediently, Gideon went down to the enemy camp with his servant Purah. What happened next was nothing short of providential. Judges 7:14 describes the scene. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling his friend about a dream. "I had a dream," he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. It God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." This dream and its interpretation were exactly what Gideon needed to hear. The barley loaf, a common food among the poorer Israelites, represented Gideon's unlikely army. The overturned tent symbolized the imminent defeat of the Midianites. God was showing Gideon that even the enemies were unconsciously recognizing the divine power acting through him. Strengthened by this experience, Gideon returned to the Israelite camp, ready to lead his small army. Judges 7:15 tells us, when Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped God. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Now, with renewed faith, Gideon was ready to implement the divine strategy, and what an unusual strategy it was. Judges 7:16 details, dividing the 300 men into 3 companies. He placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside. Imagine the scene: 300 men each, carrying a trumpet in one hand and a jar with a torch hidden in the other. It was not the conventional armament one would expect from an army about to face a vastly superior force. Gideon then instructed his men, as we read in Judges 7:17-18, watch. He told them, "Follow my lead when I get to the edge of the camp. Do exactly as I do when I... And all who are with me, blow our trumpets then. From all around the camp, blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." The strategy was simple yet brilliant in its psychological effectiveness. The plan was to create the illusion of a much larger army, taking advantage of the darkness of night and the element of surprise. Judges 7:19-20 describes the attack. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed. The guard, they blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The three companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted a sword for the Lord, and for Gideon, the effect was immediate and devastating. Judges 7:21-22 reports, "Each man stood in his place around the camp, and all the Midianites ran crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The army fled to Beth Shittah, towards Zerah, as far as the border of Abel Mola near Tabbath. The confusion in the Midianite camp was total. The sudden sound of 300 trumpets, the brightness of 300 torches emerging from the darkness, and the battle cry echoing from all sides created the illusion of a massive army attacking from all directions. In their panic, the Midianites began to fight among themselves, unable to distinguish friend from foe in the darkness and chaos. This divine strategy demonstrates several important truths. First, it shows that God often uses unusual methods to achieve his purposes. The weapons of victory were not swords or spears, but trumpets, jars, and torches. Second, it highlights the importance of obedience. Gideon and his men followed God's instructions to the letter, even when they seemed strange or illogical. Their faithfulness was rewarded with a miraculous victory. Third, it illustrates the power of faith in action. The 300 men had to believe that the plan would work, exposing themselves to danger by breaking their jars and revealing their positions with the torches. Finally, it demonstrates that when God is in control, even the smallest forces can overcome the greatest challenges. The victory did not come through Israel's military strength, but through the power of God, working through his obedient people. As the Midianites fled in panic, Gideon and his men remained in their positions, witnessing the incredible divine intervention. The battle was won, but the pursuit of the fleeing enemies was just beginning. The Israelite army, which had watched from a distance, would now join the hunt, completing the victory that God had so miraculously initiated. Gideon, now fully confident in the power of God, led an unrelenting pursuit of the retreating enemies. This phase of the campaign would reveal not only Gideon's determination, but also the internal challenges that Israel would face even amidst victory. Judges 7:23-4 shows us how the pursuit began. The Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh were called out, and they went in pursuit of the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hills of Ephraim, saying, "Come down to attack the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them, as far as Beth-bar." This call demonstrates Gideon's strategic leadership. He not only pursued the enemy, but also mobilized additional forces to cut off the Midianites' escape route. The response was immediate, as we see in the continuation of verse 24. So all the Ephraimites were called out and took the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth-bar. Gideon's strategy proved effective. Judges 725 reports they also captured 2 Midianite leaders, Orb and Zeb. They killed Orb at the rock of Orb, and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued the Midianites, and brought the heads of Orb and Zeb to Gideon, who was on the other side of the Jordan. The capture and execution of these Midianite leaders was a significant blow against the enemy. However, this victory also brought to light internal tensions among the tribes of Israel. Judges 8. 1 shows us the beginning of this conflict. The Ephraimites asked, "Gideon, why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they criticized him sharply. This reaction from the Ephraimites reveals the tribal pride and desire for recognition that often threatened Israel's unity. They felt excluded from the glory of the initial victory, even though they had played a crucial role in capturing the enemy leaders. Gideon's response demonstrates his diplomatic wisdom. Judges 8:2-3 records, "But he answered them, 'What have I accomplished? Compared to you, aren't the gleanings of Ephah better than the full grape? Harvest of Abiezer, God gave Orb and Zeb the Midianite leaders into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?' At this their resentment against him subsided. With this skillful response, Gideon managed to calm the Ephraimites, valuing their contribution and downplaying his own achievements. This ability to handle internal conflicts would be crucial for maintaining Israel's unity during and after the campaign. Meanwhile, the pursuit of the Midianite kings continued. Judges 8:45 gives us a sense of the intensity of this pursuit. Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted, yet still pursuing the enemy, came to the Jordan and crossed it. He said to the men of Sako, "Give some bread to my troops, they are worn out, and I'm still pursuing Zeba and Zunah, the kings of Midian." This request from Gideon reveals both the determination of his small army and the difficulties they faced. They were exhausted, but persisted in the pursuit, demonstrating remarkable dedication to their mission. However, the response from the men of Sako was surprisingly negative. Judges 8:6 records, "But the officials of Sako said, 'Zeba and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your troops.'" This refusal not only demonstrated a lack of solidarity, but also a lack of faith in Gideon's ability to complete his mission. Gideon's response was harsh and prophetic. Judges 87 tells us, "Then Gideon said very well, when the Lord has given Zeba and Zalmunna into my hands, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns." And Gideon faced a similar reception in Penuel, as we see in Judges 8:89. From there, he went up to Penuel and made the same request, but they answered as the men of Sako had. So he said to the men of Penuel, "When I return victorious, I will tear down this tower." These interactions reveal the political and social complexities that Gideon had to navigate even amidst his military campaign. Not everyone in Israel was united in support of his mission, and some even showed open hostility or skepticism. Despite these setbacks, Gideon and his men persisted in their pursuit. Judges 8:1-12 gives us the outcome of this chase. Zeba and Zunah were in Karor with a force of about 15 Ugurdu men. All that remained of the armies of the eastern peoples, 120,000 swordsmen, had fallen. Gideon made a surprise attack against the army by the route of the nomads east of Noah and Yogar, and he routed the army. Zeba and Zunah, the two Midianite kings, fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing the entire army. The capture of these kings marked the effective end of the Midianite threat. However, Gideon still had accounts to settle with those who had refused to help him. Judges 8:13-17 describes how he fulfilled his promises to Sako and Penuel. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Haris. He captured a young man of Sako and interrogated him, and the young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 authorities of Sako, the leaders of the city. Then Gideon went to the men of Sako and said, "Here are Zeba and Zunah, concerning whom you taunted me, saying, 'Have you already captured Zeba and Zunah? Why should we give bread to your weary men?'" So he took the leaders of the city and punished them with the thorns and briars of the wilderness. He also tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. These actions of Gideon, although they may seem severe by modern standards, demonstrate the fulfillment of his word and establish his authority as leader of Israel. They also serve as a warning against a lack of solidarity and support in times of national crisis. Finally, Gideon confronted the captured Midianite. Kings, Judges 81-82 recounts this final encounter. Then he asked Zebah and Zunah, "What kind of men were those whom you killed at Tabor, men like you?" They answered, each one with the bearing of a prince. Gideon replied, "Those men were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared them, I would not kill you." He said to Jether, his oldest son, "Draw your sword and kill them." But Jeth did not draw his sword, because he was afraid. Being still a boy, Zebah and Zunah said, "Get up yourself and kill us, for as the man is, so is his strength." So Gideon arose and killed them, and he took the ornaments off the necks of their camels. This final episode of the pursuit reveals several aspects of Gideon's character. His determination to avenge his brothers shows his sense of justice and familial loyalty. The hesitation of his son Jether and Gideon's subsequent action demonstrate his strength and resolve as a leader. With the death of Zebah and Zunah, Gideon's campaign against the Midianites came to an end. Israel was free from its oppressors, and Gideon emerged as a powerful and respected leader. However, the consequences of this victory and Gideon's subsequent decisions would have a lasting impact on the history of Israel. As we will see in the next chapter of his life, after the decisive victory over the Midianites, Gideon found himself in a position of great respect and authority in Israel. His legacy, however, would be marked by a mix of triumph and tragedy, faithfulness and failure. The people, impressed with his leadership, made a surprising proposal. Judges 822 states, "The Israelites said to Gideon, 'Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian.'" This offer reflected the people's desire for strong, centralized leadership, foreshadowing the future monarchy of Israel. However, Gideon's response demonstrated his understanding of the true king of Israel. Judges 8:23 records his reply, "But Gideon told them, 'I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you.'" This declaration by Gideon was a powerful testimony of his faith and understanding of God's role as the true leader of Israel. He recognized that his victory was not the result of his own strength or skill, but of God's power. However, Gideon's subsequent actions revealed a complexity in his character. Judges 8:24-27 narrates an intriguing episode. He continued, "I do have one request of you. Give me, each of you, an earring from your share of the plunder." "It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings," they answered. "We'll be glad to give them." So they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his plunder into it. The weight of the gold earrings, he asked, for came to about $5, not counting the ornamental pendants, the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on the camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in his hometown Ophrah. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. This episode reveals a significant flaw in Gideon's judgment. Although his intention may not have been to establish an idolatrous cult, his actions led the people to a form of misplaced worship. The ephod, priestly garment he created, became an object of improper veneration, diverting the people from true worship of God. Despite this mistake, the immediate impact of Gideon's leadership was positive for Israel. Judges 8:28 tells us, "Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again." During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. These 40 years of peace were a testimony to the effectiveness of Gideon's leadership. and God's blessing upon Israel when the people turned to him. However, the narrative also reveals that the seeds of future problems were being sown. Judges 8:30-31 gives us a glimpse into Gideon's personal life. Gideon had 70 sons born to him, for he had many wives. His concubine who lived in Shaim also bore him a son whom he named Imic. This description of Gideon's family, particularly the mention of his many wives and a concubine, suggests that he may have adopted practices more associated with the kings of neighboring nations than with the theocratic leader of Israel. The specific mention of AIMC is significant, for he would come to play a tragic role in the subsequent history of Israel. The end of Gideon's life is summarized in Judges 8:32. Gideon's son of Joash died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abzrites. Tragically, after Gideon's death, the people quickly turned away. Judges 8:33-35 reports, "No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baalbath as their god, and did not remember the Lord, their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show loyalty to the family of Jubal, that is Gideon, for all the good things he had done for them. This returned to idolatry and lack of gratitude toward Gideon's family demonstrates the cyclical nature of Israel's history. During the time of the Judges, periods of faithfulness and blessing were often followed by spiritual decline and turmoil. The story of Gideon is a powerful testimony to God's ability to use unlikely people to fulfill his purposes, from his calling as the least in his family to becoming a powerful leader of Israel. Gideon exemplifies how faith and obedience can overcome fear and insecurity. Purity. Gideon's life challenges us to trust in God even when circumstances seem impossible. It reminds us that God can do much with little when we place our trust in him. As we reflect on this story, let us ask ourselves, where in our lives might God be calling us to act in faith? What armies of difficulties do we face that seem insurmountable? How can we, like Gideon, move forward in obedience, trusting not in our own strength but in God's power? The story of Gideon remains relevant today, reminding us that God is still in the business of transforming ordinary people into extraordinary instruments of his will. May we, like Gideon, respond to God's call with faith and obedience, ready to be used by him in ways we may never have imagined possible. If this story touched your heart and you wish to learn more about the heroes of faith in the Bible, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can explore the rich lessons that Scripture has to teach and apply them to our daily lives.